Hello, welcome to today's session. Today we will focus on reading and note-taking at the university level, catered towards student athletes. My name is Shakib Ahmed, and I will be taking you through this module. If you have any questions during the session or after it, please feel free to email me, and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. So let's begin. A brief overview of today's session. We will be focusing on tips and strategies for active reading, effective note-taking, and active learning during lectures. All of this leads to better results in learning and on your GPA. The main difference between readings in high school compared to that at university is the volume and pace, and this volume and pace will increase every year. Readings will also become more challenging over time. Now, the difference between active and passive reading is one of engagement. When you're actively reading, you are not only reading, but you are asking yourself questions, trying to answer those questions, and trying to understand the material. Whereas passive reading, you are reading in order to hit page counts, to read it because you were told to, and it can seem like a boring task because you are not engaged to your readings. This makes it hard to stay connected and thus makes it hard to learn. One piece of advice I will give you in regards to reading is that material will be sequential. This means it's easy to fall behind in your courses if you do not keep up with your readings. Your class material will build upon one another from previous weeks, meaning if you are behind a few weeks, less concepts and terms in class will make sense to you. So please stay on top of your readings and make a schedule. I have a few tips for active reading. Start by reading overviews and abstracts of your readings to come up with your own summary, and develop questions you wish to ask as you're reading. Another tip I have is don't assume everything will sink in all at once. Additionally, not every reading will have the same value, so learn to prioritize your readings as you cannot read everything. And rest assured, no one reads without difficulty. It will be challenging, but if you keep up with it, it will be worth it. Not only for your GPA, but also to develop your learning skills over time. The age-old question I face from students is, how much time should I spend studying and or reading? The answer, it'll vary based on your discipline and the course that you're taking. For example, engineering courses will be more problem set based for your homework, which means if you get through your problem sets and you're able to grasp the content, then that is you achieving success. Life science courses, on the other hand, is more about reviewing lecture materials and preparing for labs, tests, and exams. Social sciences follow the classic, for every 1 hour of lecture, you should study for 2 hours. But you will also have assignments and tests, which means your reading weight may differ depending on what you have coming up. One piece of advice I have for you is, if you have a part-time job, commute far, things that take up time, think about your course load. Also take into account having a social life, because these things all take away hours from your day and can possibly have a detriment to your grades. It can be done, but just be careful, mindful, and aware of your situation. Now, when preparing to read and take notes, make sure that you know yourself. Everybody is different in their study manners. What are your preferences for studying? Where do you study best? When do you study best? And how are you studying? Some like to study at home, while others prefer the campus. Some study the best in mornings, while others prefer nights. Some like breaks frequently, while some study for longer stretches of time to get longer breaks. Make sure you do what works best for you, not somebody else. A model that I like to use in regards to active reading is called the SQ4R. This stands for survey, question, read, respond, recite, and finally, review. This strategy helps you keep from rereading the same material over and over and lets you focus on important information to be more efficient as a reader and help you prepare for those big tests, exams, and even assignments. The first component in the model of the SQ4R method is surveying. Surveying is when you go over the entire chapter and each section, where you read the summaries and learning outcomes, focusing on titles, diagrams, and bolded terms. It's meant for you to get familiar with the material, before actually reading it in depth. If you're short on time, this can help you map out and add structure to your reading sessions. Now, why is surveying material important? It helps you ease yourself into the material and to make yourself know where your reading's headed. It's almost like knowing how the chapter will end before actually reading it. The next component on the SQ4R model is question. This is where we use questions as an aid for engaging with our readings. It's asking questions before and while we are reading, making critical thinking an ongoing process. After you have surveyed the chapter, you want to look through the subheadings and develop questions related to the material. Now, you may be wondering, why should we ask questions before starting our readings? By asking questions first, you answer those questions as you read. You are then actively engaging with the material and you're asking, what does this term mean? Why is it important to study the subject we're looking at? Now, one of the easiest ways to come up with questions is to turn a subheading into a question. Here, the subheading is asking whether psychology is a science. So your questions then could be, why do psychologists use the scientific methods? Or what is a scientific method? These are just a few examples, just as a rule of thumb for you to apply in your future readings. Reading and responding are stages 3 and 4 on the SQ4R method. I've put them together because they go hand in hand. Make sure to read all the text under each subheading, understand all the information, and then move on to the next section. A tip I have is don't highlight everything. Read an entire paragraph before highlighting and underlining items. If you do it this way, your highlights will be what you learned, not a random section of text, thus helping you review and actually knowing the important bits later when you're studying for midterms and exams. Another tip is taking brief notes as you read. When doing this, make sure you highlight key themes and concepts and do it in your own words as much as possible, as learning will be easier if it's in your own words rather than somebody else's. While doing this, also make sure to respond to the questions you came up with in the previous stage. This can be done in the margins of your textbook or your notebook so you can follow along when you come back and review the material closer to the date of your test or exam. The next step is recite, but it could be write. It could be drawing. Reciting doesn't have to be verbal. The main thing here is that you are testing your knowledge of material by using your memory. Before going on to read the next section of your text, cover the text and see if you can answer your questions without looking at your notes or the text. Again, this may seem like it'll take a long time to do, but you are training yourself to recall the information, which is especially helpful for midterms and exams. And remember, reciting can come in many variations. It does not always have to be saying things out loud, which we'll see in the next slide. As per my last slide, reciting does not always mean verbally speaking out what you have learned. Make sure you recite in a way that works for you. This can change between the types of courses you are in or who you are. Does reciting entail being auditory? Yes, it can, but it does not have to. An example of auditory reciting means where you gain understanding through reciting major points out loud. If you are more of a visual person, you can do this through taking notes and doing drawings. If you're a kinesthetic learner, it means you will learn through physical movements. This is especially key in kinesiology students who have physical components to their evaluations and not just written. Lastly, you can learn collaboratively through working with peers and learn one-on-one. I call this social. So like I said, you can recite in many different ways. It's the process that matters, not the way you're doing it. And the last stage on the SQ4R model is reviewing. It's going over what you have learned, the practice problems you may have done, and the readings that you may have done before class. Don't just slam your books and walk away once you've done your readings. Identify the gaps. What didn't you understand? If you did your readings on time, you'll be more likely to get help, as the people you ask will know that you're on track. If you are unsure of concepts, go and ask your professors and TAs. If you're doing week 2 readings in week 12 and are slacking, your professor or TA will be less likely to help you and commend your efforts than somebody who's keeping up all semester and just doesn't understand the concept. It's all about relationship building.